Inflation fell. That is the headline. But then why do so many people in Canada still feel like they are losing? If inflation is under control, why does the grocery store keep scaring people? Why does going out to eat seem like a luxury? Why does paying rent still give the feeling that the game turned against the middle class? And why, even when the numbers improve, does real life not follow at the same speed? In this video, the central question is simple. If inflation fell in Canada, why does the country still seem so expensive? And the answer is not in a single number. It is in three things that almost never appear together in the same conversation. First, lower inflation does not erase the accumulated increases of the last years. Second, the prices that weigh most in day-to-day life did not really fall. And third, today's Canada is not being felt in the same way by everyone. And there is an important detail here. Part of this feeling of relief that appears in the headlines may be more technical than real. In other words, inflation fell on paper, but in the shopping cart, in the rent, and in the end-of-the-month budget, the story is different. Let's start with the most important point of all. When the government and the newspapers say that inflation fell, that does not mean that prices returned to what they were before. It only means that they are rising more slowly. In February 2026, Canada's official inflation index rose 1.8% compared with the previous year, below January's 2.3%. It seems great, and, in fact, compared with the inflationary peak, it is a relief. But accumulated high prices do not disappear just because the pace slowed down. It is like being inside a car that was at 120 per hour and now fell to 60. You slowed down, yes, but you are still far from being stopped. And this is where many people feel that the official narrative and real life do not match. Because what destroys the feeling of comfort is not only the rate of the month, it is the level at which prices stayed. The official data themselves show this clearly. In February 2026, the prices of foods bought at the supermarket rose 4.1% in 12 months. And more importantly, they were 30.1% above the February 2021 level. 30% in 4 years on a basic item is not a statistical detail. It changes habits, changes diet, changes routine, changes the feeling of financial security inside the home. So the first answer to the video's question already appears. Canada still seems expensive because it continues to be expensive. Inflation fell, but the price did not return. And there is more. Not all prices matter in the same way for people's perception. If the cost of a service that you use once a year slows down, that almost does not change your feeling of expensive life. But if what rises is rent, groceries, restaurant, gasoline, insurance, transportation, that hits every week, sometimes every day. In the February CPI, one of the main factors of upward pressure was still food away from home. The prices of foods bought in restaurants rose 7.8% in 12 months. Rente rose 3,9%. Automobile assurance rose 8,2%. And meat prices also kept pressuring, with the meat category up 8.2%. In the case of fresh or frozen beef, the annual increase was 13.9%. Now think about the psychological effect of that. You may not even follow economic reports, but you notice when the hamburger got more expensive. You notice when the rent renewal weighs more. You notice when the car insurance goes up, and when the week's shopping buys less than it used to buy. And that is why so many people look at official inflation and think, this is not what I am living. In fact, Statistics Canada itself recognizes this point. CPI measures the average experience of the average Canadian household. It does not measure, with perfection, the experience of each family. Your spending may be very different from the average basket, and because of that, your personal inflation may be higher than the headline inflation. This is one of the most important secrets of this discussion. Canada is not expensive in the same way for everyone, but it is heavy exactly where it hurts most for many people. And here, housing enters, because it is impossible to talk about cost of living in Canada without talking about a roof. The shelter component in the CPI showed an increase of 1.5% in February 2026, a slower pace than before. But that does not mean that living became easy. First, because within housing there are very different realities. For those who rent, the increase in rent was still 3.9% in 12 months. Second, because those who finance a property still live the delayed effect of a long period of interest rates, much higher than normal for the generation that got used to cheap money. And the Bank of Canada kept the policy rate at 2.25% on the 18th of March 2026. Do you see the trap? In the statistics, the inflationary pressure of housing slowed down. In real life, rent continues to rise. Buying a house remains difficult for many people, and the financing cost still weighs on the budget and on consumption decisions. In other words, even when inflation improves, the financial memory of high interest rates remains alive. And that memory weighs more than it seems. Because cost of living is not only about what is more expensive today. It is also about the space that was left or stopped being left after you pay for the basics. If income grows faster than prices, there is some relief. And here, there is an important piece of data. The average hourly wage of employees rose 3.9% in February to 37.56 Canadian dollars. In theory, that is greater than the full inflation of 1.8%. So why does the feeling of tightness continue? Because averages hide many things. Not everyone received that gain. Not every income rises at the same pace. And, mainly, much of the damage had already been done in previous years, when food, rent, and interest rates eroded purchasing power. It is like trying to fill a bucket with holes with the faucet now more open. It helps, but it does not automatically give back everything that was lost. And there is another element that widens this feeling. The economy is moving, but without transmitting confidence. Canada's real GDP rose only 0.1% in January 2026, with a preliminary estimate of 0.2% for February. That is not a declared recession, but it also does not give the image of a vibrant economy. At the same time, the labor market showed weakness. The country lost 84,000 jobs in February, the employment rate fell to 6%, and unemployment among young people aged 15 to 24 rose to 14.1%. So look at the complete picture. Inflation fell, yes, but the economy is not transmitting abundance. Wages even advance on average, but employment weakened in February. Interest rates are much below the peak, but still do not give back the feeling of breathing room. And what weighs most in daily life, food, rent, restaurant, insurance, continues above what many people consider acceptable. Now comes the point that almost always closes this puzzle. Part of the inflation slowdown in February had a base effect. Statistics Canada explained that the end of the GST/HST break in February 2025 raised prices in that month, especially in categories like restaurants, and that movement from last year helped pull the annual comparison downward now. In other words, part of February's relief came because the comparison base became higher, not because suddenly everything became cheap again. And the agency itself said that March 2026 would be the last month still affected by this specific effect. This detail is technical, but it changes everything in the interpretation, because it explains why the headline may sound better than the experience of the common person at the grocery store checkout. So, in the end, why does Canada still seem so expensive? Because lower inflation does not mean low prices. Because what weighs most on the pocket continues accumulating increases. Because housing and food still compress the budget. Because CPI measures a national average, while real life happens in very personal baskets. And because, even with better numbers, the economy still has not given back the sense of security that many people had before. The truth is this: Canada's problem today is not only inflation, it is the new level of cost of living. And until income, housing, and essential prices fit better again into the life of the common Canadian, the feeling of tightness will continue even when the headline says that inflation fell.